Welcome back to the deep dive. If you work in security, risk management, or frankly, any business that uses a computer, you know that feeling, that
Yeah.
relentless feeling.
Oh, yeah.
You finally get a solid handle on what the bad guys are doing. You get the controls implemented, and then you discover they moved the goalposts last week.
Or last night.
Or even last night, exactly. And that is the core exhausting tension we are unpacking today.
It's the definition of an asymmetrical battle, isn't it?
It is.
The defense community, we invest so heavily to build controls for the techniques we saw used last year. But in the time it takes to actually roll those out,
They've already moved on.
they've already tweaked the execution steps,
Yeah.
the subtle procedural details.
Yeah.
And if you're not tracking those tiny, granular shifts, you are absolutely running on outdated intelligence. You have blind spots you don't even know exist yet.
Okay, so let's unpack this and get strategic about it. We've pulled some truly critical insights today, drawn directly from the 2025 Threat-Led Defense Report. This one was published by Tidal Cyber.
And this isn't theory. That's the important part.
Right, not just vendor marketing.
No, this is hard, distilled observation from tens of thousands of observed techniques and procedures, collected actively in the wild all through 2025.
And that level of detail is what makes this report and, well, this deep dive so valuable, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We are looking at real-world activity that's mapped directly to adversary behaviors using, the gold standard, the IMARI, ATT, and CK framework.
So what's our mission today, then?
It's pretty straightforward. We want to extract the most critical shifts in attacker behavior we saw in 2025. We're focusing on let's call them the nuggets of insight that demand a real defensive shift.
We want you, the listener, to walk away with knowledge that's thorough, but also immediately relevant, without the information overload.
Exactly.
So let's get the main thesis out on the table right away. What is the fundamental shift we all need to internalize from this?
The focus is, it is fundamentally it's moving away from just generic tools and generalized techniques, what they use, to the specific procedures, the execution details they employ. We are talking about really subtle changes in the operational playbook.
So not just that they used a tool, but how they used it, step by step.
Precisely. How they leverage common enterprise tools in a new sequence, how they pivot inside a cloud environment, and how they weaponize these tiny behavioral shifts to exploit the most common defensive blind spots.
Can you give me an analogy for that?
Sure. It's the difference between knowing someone drives a car, that's the technique, and knowing they drive a specific red SUV, they take the back roads, and they always stop at the third traffic light. That's the procedure.
I see. And defense now has to focus on that level of specificity.
It has to.
That sets the context perfectly. I'm ready to dive into the evidence. You keep us tethered to the so what, why these subtle procedural shifts should, immediately change how organizations think.
How they structure their security programs, where they put their budget, that's the so what.
Let's jump straight into section 1 then. This concept of TTP evolution, or what the report calls adapting in place.
I love that term.
Me too. Adapting in place. It just suggests this efficiency. They aren't constantly sinking huge resources into developing entirely new malware from scratch.
Exactly. Why would they?
They're just giving their existing proven attack chains a dangerous tune-up. Explain what that means when we look at a group like Void-Redissu.
It means they are operating with maximized efficiency. These established threat groups, they realize that if they just change the syntax of a command, or maybe just the order of 2 steps, they can often bypass the detection rule that was built against the old way of doing things.
So it's about taking their existing tools, the things they know work, and just tweaking the execution.
Fundamentally tweaking the execution procedures, yes.
Yeah.
Or the procedural chain. They're updating their playbook specifically to get around the latest defensive updates and controls that everyone just rolled out.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because the report provides these concrete examples of groups not just tweaking syntax, but dramatically changing their fundamental motives, their targets. Let's start with Void-Redissu.
Void-Redissu is a phenomenal case study in what we call modern threat hybridization.
Okay. What were they known for before?
They were, for a long time, known almost exclusively for large-scale, disruptive ransomware campaigns. Purely financially motivated, that was their business model, their financial engine.
But in 2025, the data shows this significant structural behavioral pivot. That must have surprised the researchers.
It absolutely did, because it's a costly pivot to make. Their activity expanded dramatically from purely ransomware into something much more sophisticated, espionage-aligned behavior.
Espionage. So we're talking nation-state level objectives.
Objectives, yes.
Yeah.
This group started targeting critical national infrastructure, things like telecom, energy grids, military contractors, and very specific government organizations. This is not the target list of a typical ransomware affiliate who's just looking for a quick payout.
Wait, hold on. Why would a financially successful ransomware group make that kind of strategic pivot? I mean, ransomware is incredibly lucrative. Espionage is, well, it's fraught with risk, right?
Yeah.
It often requires state-level resources just to process the data you steal.
That's the multi-million-dollar question we have to ask. It suggests a couple of pretty significant possibilities.
Okay.
One, the ransomware as a service market is maturing to the point where, state-sponsored entities or intelligence services are actively leveraging existing criminal infrastructure. They're just outsourcing.
So they're basically contracting Void Rabasu to perform specific access operations.
Possibly. Or maybe Void Rabasu's leadership just identified that the high-value sensitive data they stole during their old intrusions was worth exponentially more to a secondary state-aligned buyer than it was to the original victim.
So it signals a profound shift in intent. They're moving from pure profit toward strategic data theft and long-term disruption.
Exactly. And the researchers tracked actual, measurable, procedural changes tied to this shift. This confirms it wasn't just them changing their victim list.
So it's not just a change in who they hit, but how they hit them.
Correct. We're not just talking about them switching industries. Researchers tracked key changes in their custom tooling, their sophisticated methods for credential access, and, critically, a complete overhaul of their detection evasion techniques.
What does that look like?
It included expanded use of advanced techniques specifically designed to function effectively against cloud and enterprise environments, places where, traditional perimeter security often fails to see the lateral movement that's happening between different cloud services.
Okay, so Void Rabasu pivoted targets and motives, hybridization. Now let's look at Scattered Spider. This is a group that's demonstrated incredible persistence and really broad reach.
Scattered Spider's activity, tracked from 2022 all the way through 2025, it reflects a steady, aggressive expansion across platforms, across sectors.
Where did they start?
They initially gained notoriety for targeting customer support and business process outsourcing firms, BPOs, the classic supply chain entry points to many, many large organizations.
Which, as an entry point, is almost brilliant in its simplicity, isn't it? Why try to hack the main vault when you can just trick the person who has the key to the side door?
Exactly. But they quickly moved beyond that specialization. In 2025, they began aggressively hitting retail, technology, and especially the finance sectors.
But the report highlights something even more critical.
Yes. The most critical element of their operational expansion was the profound and dedicated targeting of software as a service. SaaS platforms.
The SaaS problem. This is where organizations are increasingly putting their most critical IP, their crown jewels. They're trusting external providers with it.
When Scattered Spider knows it.
What specific platforms did the report identify as being in their crosshairs?
The analysis showed extensive compromise attempts against the most critical business collaboration and data platforms. We're talking Salesforce, Microsoft Teams, Slack, Confluence, and SharePoint.
Wow. Think about that list. These aren't just static servers. These are the live communication hubs of a company.
They're the CRM systems holding every single customer interaction, the document repositories. Compromising these environments grants an attacker access to massive amounts of proprietary data and internal communications, often bypassing perimeter and traditional endpoint defenses entirely.
That immediately raises the question of operational complexity. I mean, if they're moving between Salesforce, Teams, and maybe an organization's on-prem directory, they must be managing an incredibly complex attack chain.
And that complexity is exactly what the data confirms. Researchers recorded 225 distinct procedures
225.
across 94 identified clusters, all tied to Scattered Spider activity. And this isn't just a random number. It demonstrates their incredible operational complexity and the sheer volume of unique execution steps they employ.
So they're not just using one single static script.
Not at all. They have an adaptive, massive playbook that's tailored to the specific target environment, whether it's a cloud platform or an on-prem server. They're constantly changing the specific procedures to maintain persistence and evade detection.
Okay, let's move on to Acura ransomware operations. They also adapted through 2025, but the report says it was in a more subtle way, more internally focused.
Acura is a crucial example of adaptation through refinement. rather than complete reinvention. They continue their high-impact activity. We saw 165 procedure sightings, but they focused heavily on the most critical moments of the kill chain:
Which are
credential access, data exfiltration, and most aggressively, recovery inhibition.
recovery inhibition. You touched on this before. For our listener, what exactly does that entail, and why is Akira focusing their procedural changes there?
Recovery inhibition means deploying procedures that are specifically designed to make it functionally impossible, or at least extremely time-consuming and costly, for the victim to restore their systems without paying the ransom.
So they're burning the lifeboats.
That's a great way to put it. This includes aggressively targeting and deleting backups, both local and cloud-based snapshots, deleting shadow copies, disrupting centralized backup servers, and often corrupting system configuration files.
And Akira's procedural changes zeroed in on this.
Yes, they focused on how they found and targeted these recovery systems. They were increasing their efficiency at maximizing the pressure on the victim organization to just pay quickly.
So they're reusing familiar commands, but the sequence or the parameters of those commands change just enough to slide past detection.
Precisely. They rely heavily on what we call living off the land tools, or LOL bins. Their tooling stays pretty consistent. They rely on common enterprise reconnaissance utilities. If they can use a tool the system administrator uses every single day, they just blend into the noise.
Like what specifically? Give us an example that really differentiates the general tool from the specific procedure.
Okay, the report specifically called out AdFind, NetGroup, and SharpHound. These are legitimate, powerful tools used by network admins to profile Active Directory. The technique is account discovery. That's TTO87 in MITRE, a T-T-C-K. But if a security control merely alerts on the presence of the AdFind executable, it's going to be useless. Sysadmins use it constantly.
So you'd get a million false positive.
A million. The procedure is what matters. It's running AdFind half object category person lineage H 10.1.1 pick 11 from a specific temporary directory at 3 a.m. from a user account that hasn't logged in for 6 months.
Ah, the context.
The specific command syntax, the parameters, the timing, that whole context is the procedure defenders must detect. And Akira is brilliant at modifying those procedures just enough.
That clarifies the core distinction perfectly. So what is this widespread shift to cloud and SaaS targeting, especially with groups like Scattered Spider? What does it mean for defenders' budgets and strategy? Why does this make traditional EDR less effective?
It fundamentally moves the effective attack surface away from traditional endpoints and local servers. That's where security teams historically invested, 80% of their budget via endpoint detection and response solutions, EDR.
And EDR is great what it does.
It's fantastic at detecting file execution, registry changes, local process injection, but it has zero visibility into a compromised Salesforce login session that's executed from a user's home Wi-Fi, or consent abuse occurring directly within Microsoft Teams via OAuth tokens.
So the detection is failing because the activity is happening completely outside the traditional scope of the tool.
That's the critical insight. The security industry needs to aggressively pivot to where the data actually lives now and how access is managed. The failure of EBR visibility in these cloud environments means defenders have to aggressively invest in things like identity threat detection and response ITDR and cloud security posture management, CSPM.
And focus on behavioral analysis of logs.
Exactly. Authentication logs, OAuth token activity. These threat groups aren't adapting just to avoid detection. They are adapting to exploit the fundamental architectural shift toward the cloud-centric modern business.
That connection between SaaS targeting and initial access brings us neatly to Section 2, which focuses on 0 days. Historically, if you heard the term zero-day exploit,
You thought nation state.
immediately, a vulnerability unknown to the vendor, no patch available. You assumed you were dealing with a high-end intelligence operation. It felt like an incredibly elite, expensive, and rare tactic.
It was. For a long time, 0 days were the crown jewels of the exploit world. They were expensive, they were used judiciously, and their use usually signaled a high-stakes, long-term intelligence operation. For spying, not for mass criminal profit.
But the 2025 trend that's documented in this report is showing something very different. Wider adoption across, common, criminal, and hybrid actors.
Correct. The data explicitly shows that 0-day use is being commoditized.
Commoditized. What does that mean in this context?
It means they're becoming cheaper, more widely available through various exploit brokers and dark web markets. And critically, they're easier for financially motivated criminal groups to acquire and integrate into their existing scalable playbooks.
So it dramatically lowers the barrier to entry for these highly destructive, widespread
It
attacks.
does. Let's talk about how this commoditization actually works. It's not like they're buying them on Amazon.
Right.
It's a sophisticated underground economy.
Yep.
You have exploit brokers and vulnerability acquisition programs, VAPs, that pay researchers huge sums for these vulnerabilities. We're talking six figures or more sometimes.
And once they're acquired.
The exploit is packaged up, often with a working procedural guide on how to use it effectively, and then it's sold to a curated list of top-tier criminal affiliates. This allows a financially motivated actor who can pay the price, let's say tens of thousands of dollars, to suddenly access a tool that was previously reserved only for espionage units.
Do we have a sense of the sheer scale of this transition? Is it a trickle or a flood?
It's a flood. The report identifies over 58 distinct threat objects associated with known or suspected zero-day exploitation throughout the year.
58.
58. To put that in perspective, a decade ago, seeing a single zero-day exploit in the wild was headline news. Now, finding almost 6 dozen being actively leveraged. It just illustrates the scale of the spread into the mainstream cybercrime landscape.
It's no longer a tool for the top 3 or 4 state-sponsored groups.
It's a capability that has been democratized down to the sophisticated ransomware as a service affiliate level.
Let's look at some of the specific campaigns that illustrate this wider adoption and its impact on infrastructure security.
We saw several key operational examples. One was Chinese-linked groups exploiting vulnerabilities in SharePoint environments at scale. We already talked about SharePoint being a collaboration hub.
Full of sensitive documents.
Exactly. These 0 days provided the initial foothold into those environments. And we also saw a significant focus on remote access infrastructure.
Which is absolutely vital for businesses now.
A massive campaign involving the exploitation of Avanti VPN systems began in December 2024 and carried right through 2025. VPN access is the ultimate front door, especially for remote work, giving attackers access to the internal network as if they were a trusted employee.
And the exploitation involved procedural changes, too.
Yes, to maintain persistence after the initial zero-day breach was used. And critically, the financially motivated actors, the traditional cybercriminals, they are now firmly entrenched in this space.
How are they using them?
They're using these 0 days to compromise cloud infrastructure, often through public-facing appliances or systems, and then leveraging the resulting stolen data in highly aggressive extortion schemes. The goal isn't to hold the system for ransom anymore.
It's to steal the data.
It's to steal the data using that zero-day access and then threaten public disclosure or sale to maximize their profit.
So if it's commoditized, it means the bad guys are accessing the exploit much faster than defenders can respond. This is the critical implication for speed, right?
That is the paralyzing factor for defenders.
Yeah.
The speed of abuse. Exploits move so rapidly from initial discovery into active, weaponized abuse. This compresses the defender response window from what used to be weeks or even months to patch.
Into mere days?
Sometimes hours.
Yeah.
If the vulnerability is highly critical and easy to use, the window is measured in hours. You simply cannot rely on the patch cycle anymore.
Okay, so here's where the defense strategy needs to fundamentally pivot. If you can't rely on getting the patch deployed in time, or if you don't even know the vulnerability exists yet, what do you rely on?
Early detection has to pivot completely. Away from waiting for vulnerability disclosures or patches, that passive reactive defense model, to actively identifying the specific behavior tied to the exploitation itself.
You have to monitor for the procedural steps.
The steps that signal the exploit is running, yes, even before the vendor officially confirms the vulnerability exists or releases a patch.
So the 0 day might be the unique key they use to get in, but once they're inside, they still have to follow pretty standard operational steps to achieve their mission.
Exactly. The initial access procedure might be unique, the 0 day execution, but the follow-on procedures, listing users, identifying critical databases, moving laterally, staging data for exfiltration. Those are often standard INEAR ATT and CK procedures.
And if you can detect those known procedures quickly and reliably,
you contain the damage. Regardless of how novel the initial entry point was, this commoditization mandates that security teams move their detection focus 100% to a behavioral-centric, threat-led defense strategy.
covering the critical lateral movement and discovery procedures before you even worry about the 0 day itself.
That's it. But that requires deep visibility into command line activity and network connections. It's not a simple switch to flip. You need meticulous logging and the ability to analyze that data against known adversary playbooks.
The speed of commoditisation means your defense has to assume compromise and focus entirely on detection and response time.
It has to.
Okay, let's talk about the human element, because apparently the oldest trick in the book just got a massive, high-tech, and frankly, scary upgrade. Section 3 covers social engineering.
It's back.
It's back with a vengeance as a primary intrusion path in 2025. I kind of assumed that basic user training, email filters, and endpoint defenses had gotten pretty good at stopping phishing links, but apparently not.
It's back, and it's weaponized by incredible scale and unprecedented believability. Social engineering regained prominence precisely because it is the most effective way to bypass sophisticated technical controls.
The path of least resistance.
Always. Why spend weeks hacking a complex firewall when you can use AI to trick a legitimate user with privileged credentials to just walk right through the front door for you?
And the report links this resurgence directly to automation and AI tools. This is where the landscape truly changes.
This is the definitive game changer for intrusion tactics. Attackers are now using large language models, voice synthesis, image generation tools, all to scale phishing campaigns, highly personalized voice calls, and credential harvesting operations.
While dramatically increasing believability.
Exactly. AI automates the tedious, low credibility part of the scam, the generic, grammatically poor email, and makes the output highly convincing, tailored, and pretty much indistinguishable from a legitimate communication.
So it's no longer the generic email from the Prince of Nigeria that everyone spots. It's a perfectly composed, urgent email that sounds exactly like your CEO.
Referencing a specific project you discussed last week.
Using context derived from public news or corporate communications that the AI just scraped. And that level of contextual accuracy requires almost zero human effort now.
Exactly. 5 years ago, defenders worried about simple keyword filters. Now, AI is automating empathy, urgency, and relational trust. That scale is what's terrifying because you can't build a technical firewall around human psychology, especially when the attacker's communication is perfected by an LLM.
And this effectiveness leads directly to their primary target, which is identity being the new perimeter.
Campaigns are now primarily focused on attacking identity systems, exploiting SaaS access, abusing cloud administration panels, leveraging single sign-on mechanisms. If they compromise the identity, the key to the kingdom, they compromise everything that identity can touch.
Which now includes the entire organizational infrastructure, as we saw with Scattered Spider. Let's look at 2 specific case studies that show this AI-amplified evolution in practice. First up, Lunamoth.
Lunamoth is an incredible example of rapid procedural evolution. They moved far beyond simple callback phishing, which was already highly effective,
They graduated.
into complex multi-channel operations. They're combining sophisticated personalized voice calls, often using synthesized voices, with targeted email delivery, and leveraging infrastructure control to create a seamless, high-pressure, manipulative attack chain. It's designed to convince the user they are already in the middle of a major crisis.
So they are essentially running a highly professional, highly customized call center, staffed by automated tools and human operators, all coordinated to extract credentials at the moment the person is most confused or panicking.
It's highly orchestrated. The goal is to the user to grant access or run a specific command. Then we have UNC 6040, which targeted Salesforce environments specifically.
Salesforce, showing up again as a major target.
Their methods focused heavily on impersonation and what analysts are calling consent abuse.
Consent abuse, what is that?
It's a sophisticated procedural move. Instead of trying to steal the password, they often use phishing or low-level malware to trick the user into granting a malicious third-party application consent to access their data via OAuth tokens.
And that access is technically legitimate because the user clicked allow.
Exactly, even if they were tricked. Wait, so if the user grants the consent, that means the system views the subsequent large-scale data access as legitimate traffic. No alarm bells go off.
That is the key procedural insight. This technique enabled UNC 6040 to achieve large-scale data access and exfiltration without needing traditional malware. It avoids detection from almost all traditional network and endpoint security tools.
They simply trick the system, or the user, into granting legitimate authorized access to unauthorized people. They bypass the need for sophisticated file-based malware entirely.
That explains why the endpoint defenses were so successfully bypassed, right? If you're not dropping a file, or if the action is just a legitimate SSO login initiated by a coerced user, the traditional EDR system is silent.
It's completely silent. The study highlights 35 procedures connected to social engineering activity spread across 18 software platforms. This broad procedural visibility helped analysts connect these sophisticated campaigns early.
And the big aha moment for defenders.
That they identified attack chains that fundamentally bypass endpoint defenses entirely. If a entry point is an OAuth token granted via consent abuse, your antivirus, your EDR, your firewall, they're often useless because the activity is authorized in the identity layer.
So the biggest vulnerability remains the person. But now the attacker has an automated, high-fidelity tool to weaponize that human vulnerability at extreme scale.
The human element has been optimized by AI. It's the ultimate scaling mechanism for intrusion. Defense has to now focus equally, if not primarily, on identity security and governance, on multi-factor authentication resilience that prevents prompt bombing, and most critically, on robust behavioral analysis of cloud activities.
Looking for anomalous OAuth token usage or unusual admin logins.
Because the endpoint is no longer the gate they are trying to crash. If you want monitoring the identity layer with behavioral rigor, you have a massive AI-amplified blind spot.
Let's shift gears to ransomware. It feels like every day there's a new group, a new leak site, a new aggressive extortion technique. And Section 4 confirms this with the idea that the ransomware ecosystem is fragmenting and multiplying.
Fragmentation and diversity absolutely defined the ransomware landscape in 2025. It's no longer dominated by one or two massive families that operate like monopolies. It's a distributed, highly adaptive threat ecosystem. It's operating much more like a resilient startup economy.
What's the data telling us about the scale of this fragmentation, and why is it even happening?
The report tracked 54 distinct ransomware groups and related entities active during the year. And of those, 16 were brand new, emerging groups.
16 new groups. That's a lot of churn.
It's significant. Why the fragmentation? Well, law enforcement pressure is one factor. When groups get too large, they attract too much attention, forcing them to disband and immediately rebrand to evade tracking.
But that's not the main driver.
The primary driver is the operational efficiency of the ransomware as a service, or RIAS model.
The RIAS model allows for this fragmentation because the barrier to entry is just so low for an affiliate.
Precisely. The RIAS providers sell the core payload and the payment infrastructure, but most importantly, they sell the operational playbook, which leads perfectly into a key finding from the report: procedure reuse.
Tell us about that. It seems like a contradiction. How can they be fragmenting into 54 groups while also reusing the same playbooks?
This is perhaps one of the most critical operational insights in the entire report. Analysts observed extensive cross-group procedure reuse. A staggering 92% of all ransomware procedure sightings clustered with previously observed activity.
92%. That suggests that these 16 new emerging groups aren't reinventing the wheel at all.
Not even close. They are purchasing, borrowing, or sharing successful, optimized operational playbooks that maximize their efficiency and success rate.
It completely validates the RAS model as a business structure. They're not just selling the malware payload, they're selling the proven, step-by-step procedural guide.
A guide on how to execute the intrusion, the lateral movement, credential theft, and the final exfiltration in the most efficient and stealthiest manner possible.
And this homogeneity of procedure is actually a gift to defenders.
Ironically, yes, because it means we can build behavioral controls that target that 92% of common procedural activity, even if it comes from a group with a brand new name we've never seen before.
But the goals of the extortion itself have definitely evolved beyond mere encryption, right? We're talking about pain maximization now.
Absolutely. While encryption remained a part of many operations, extortion increasingly relied on more effective leverage points, things that impact the business immediately and publicly.
Like what?
Data theft, identity compromise, and major business disruption that affects the bottom line and reputation. They aim to make paying the ransom less expensive than dealing with the reputational and operational fallout of a breach.
And this feeds directly into the concept of double and triple extortion workflows. Can you detail what these workflows look like and which groups were pushing the envelope?
So double extortion is the baseline now.
Yeah.
Encrypt the systems and steal the data. If the victim can restore from backups, the attackers still have the stolen data as leverage.
And triple extortion.
That as a critical third layer. Business disruption. They'll often target supply chain partners or customers or weaponize the exposure by contacting press outlets. It moves the attack from a technical incident into a full-blown PR crisis.
Who's doing this?
Groups like Medusa, Quailin, and Interlock adopted these high-pressure workflows. and they specifically targeted critical assets to maximize their leverage.
Meaning they went after backups.
Aggressively. Yeah. Not just deleting them, but compromising the cloud assets where highly sensitive data is stored, and compromising identity systems to prove they have future control and potential access. Medusa, for example, became notorious for targeting external PR firms or news agencies to leak data if the victim refused to pay.
That is next-level psychological pressure. And the report highlights the efficiency of smaller teams in pulling all this off.
These emergent groups are moving faster. They're operating with reduced infrastructure overhead. They're agile. They achieve this efficiency through a combination of multi-platform tooling, so they can target Windows, Linux, and cloud environments seamlessly, and heavy use of living off the land techniques.
The LOL bins, again, reiterate the significance of that, why it works so well for them.
Using tools already present on the network, like PowerShell or NetGroup, makes them infinitely stealthier. These tools are legitimate. They're usually whitelisted by traditional security products.
So they don't need to drop a custom, easily identifiable piece of malware.
Their activity just looks like a system administrator's having a late night. This reduces their infrastructure overhead, makes them harder to track via signatures, and allows them to move faster. It just reinforces that the core of the attack is the specific procedure they execute with that legitimate tool, not the tool itself.
This all loops back perfectly to our core thesis. If 92% of activity clusters around known procedural steps, then focusing on the procedures, not the specific ransomware payload name, is the only sensible and scalable defense strategy.
That's the procedural driver confirmed by the research. Ransomware activity is now primarily driven by procedures, not malware families. You need behavioral coverage that is central to your defense, not a static list of known malware hashes or file names. You need to detect the sequence of actions, the discovery, the lateral movement, the recovery inhibition, no matter which of the 54 groups is launching the attack.
Okay, we've covered the 4 massive trends of 2025. The strategic evolution of established threat groups, the dangerous commoditization of 0 days, AI-amplified social engineering, and the fragmented ransomware landscape. Section 5 brings all of this together, the core defensive failure point.
The coverage gaps.
The massive, persistent coverage gaps that appear at the behavioral layer. This is the synthesis moment for our listener.
This is where we distill the so what from all those data points and connect it directly to your security effectiveness. A recurring, persistent finding across all threat activity, from Void Rebisu's espionage to Akira's disruption, is the presence of defensive gaps at the procedure level.
Let's define that oversight one more time, because it's subtle, but it's where billions of dollars in security spend are potentially failing.
The oversight stems from the difference between having, say, control visibility and having actual detection coverage.
Explain that.
Many organizations successfully track techniques and tools. They know, theoretically, that an adversary might use the technique of remote desktop protocol for lateral movement. They know the general what and the how general, but they stop there.
And what do they miss?
They miss the execution details, the exact syntax, the specific parameters, the specific file path, the sequence of commands that signal malicious intent, the how specific. This precise procedural detail receives drastically less attention during security control implementation and testing.
So if a defender has a control that says, alert if RDP is used, but the attacker just changes the exact RDP command line string or runs it from a weird directory using a service account, suddenly the control fails silently.
It fails silently. The technique is covered, but the procedure is missed.
The technique remains RDP lateral movement, but the procedure is different enough to easily evade that static or brittle detection rule that was built against a known older procedure.
That is the definition of procedural adaptation. Attackers are finding the millimeter of space between the known technique and the specific procedure you actually monitor.
And the Tidal Cyber report specifically addresses this by mapping controls directly to observed attacker procedures to verify effectiveness. This isn't just theoretical testing, is it?
Not at all. This is the critical methodology that separates this analysis from generalized security reports. They are checking if the controls trigger during live intrusions or against known, precise, real-world adversary playbooks, not just during controlled, perfect lab tests where the commands are run exactly as expected.
That verification step must be brutal. What did the data overwhelmingly show about the actual failure point when mapped against those live procedures?
The data showed controls consistently failing to activate, meaning they went silent, provided no alert, when attackers subtly altered execution steps. This happens even when the underlying I'm R18CK technique being used remains fundamentally the same.
The defense is too rigid.
Too rigid, too based on signatures or generalized rules, and the adversary's execution is too fluid, too focused on minor procedural deviations.
This suggests we're spending billions on tools that cover techniques but are easily sidestepped by adaptation. If your control has a huge coverage gap because it misses the precise procedure, that's a massive resource drain for a negligible security gain.
It should fundamentally shift how security procurement and testing are done. You have to focus on behavioral coverage metrics. You shouldn't just ask your vendor, do you cover T1087 account discovery?
You should ask,
Do you cover the 20 specific observed procedures used by Akira or Scattered Spider to execute T10087 in a cloud environment? Measuring your strength by counting techniques is misleading. Measuring it by counting successful procedural detections is accurate.
and this emphasis on measurement brings us back to the definitive conclusion from the report.
Yes. This is why Tidal Cyber CEO Rick Gordon concludes, and this is the specific actionable takeaway for you, the listener. Strength will be measured by the adversary behaviors you can stop, and that starts with understanding how attackers operate and the exact techniques they use.
It's not about blocking a new piece of malware you've never seen.
It's about stopping the actions that any successful breach takes once they're inside your network.
And if you can reliably detect and stop the specific execution procedures associated with lateral movement or recovery inhibition, that 92% common playbook,
Then it doesn't matter if the initial breach was a zero-day, a social engineering attack, or a repurposed enterprise tool. You stop the mission. Your defense becomes resilient to procedural adaptation, which is the defining characteristic of the 2025 threat landscape.
that shift in focus from signature-based generalized defenses to rigorous procedural-based behavioral vigilance is the key to closing the coverage gap.
It's everything.
That was a tremendous deep dive, synthesizing really complex data into truly actionable insights. Let's briefly recap the 4 major trends that should be front of mind for anyone securing an organization today.
First, we saw the strategic evolution of established threat groups. Void Rabbitsu shifting to high-value espionage targets, and Scattered Spider aggressively targeting identity and SaaS platforms like Salesforce, forcing that defensive shift to ITDR.
Right.
Second, the dangerous commoditization of 0 days. That shortens the defender's response time from weeks to mere days, compelling a focus on follow-on behavioral detection.
Third, the AI-driven resurgence of social engineering, powered by LLMs targeting identity systems and bypassing traditional endpoint defenses entirely. We saw that with Lunamoth's complexity and UNC 6040's consent abuse tactics.
And finally, the fragmentation and multiplication of ransomware groups, now relying on those shared reusable procedures. That 92% finding and triple extortion workflows to maximize pressure.
The collective aha moment we've drawn from the Tidal Cyber report is, well, it's crystal clear. The real battleground is shifting from preventing the use of a general technique
To detecting the highly specific way it is executed, the procedure. This demands defenses shift from static signatures and generalized controls to dynamic, granular, and measurable behavioral vigilance.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner, moving forward? We started this deep dive noting that AI is automating the scale and believability of social engineering. Think hyper-realistic phone calls, perfect internal emails, highly personalized campaigns, all generated by sophisticated LLMs.
And we established that identity is the primary target now, precisely because social engineering successfully bypasses the technical limitations of endpoint defenses. The attacker is automating persuasion.
So here is our final provocative thought for you to explore on your own. Given that the human part of the attack, the psychological manipulation, the scaling of urgency and trust, is now being automated by AI, making it cheaper, faster, and more convincingly personalized than ever before.
The question becomes,
If every interaction, every phishing attempt is fundamentally indistinguishable from a legitimate, highly personalized communication, how much more complex will defending the human identity layer become? Is the future of security truly about building sophisticated AI-driven defenses against automated human manipulation?
that is the 2026 challenge that needs to be addressed right now.
The convergence of automated manipulation and vulnerable identity systems is a field ripe for immediate, critical defensive investment. Absolutely. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.
My pleasure.
We'll see you next time as we continue to unpack the intelligence that keeps you well informed.